Good day. Today I'm going to go through a rundown of the uniform and kit that you see before you here, that being the uniform used by Royal Forces in Hong Kong from around about 1980 up until 1996 with the disbandment of the last local force. Starting off with the uniform, you see a tropical DPM head to toe, or tropical DPM uniform head to toe. Tropical DPM is rarer than 68 and 85 and certainly rarer than the S95 type of DPM. I find it quite distinctive because of its vibrancy, at least compared to other DPMs. So, for example, the brown is a more vibrant or lighter shade of brown. Some examples are even bolder on orange. The green is a more vibrant lime green as opposed to a more muted jungle green. And you see it continue with the base color being a yellowish khaki rather than a stone color that you see on S95, for example. The only other thing of note is this red patch here. Now, this red patch wasn't on all the uniforms being used, and not every soldier got a chance to wear it. It is a red square sewn onto the upper right sleeve with two cross kukris in black. This is the patch of the 48th Gurkha Brigade. From what I've seen, you didn't actually have to be a Gurkha in order to be awarded this patch. There are plenty of examples of both Hong Kong local forces having soldiers who wore this patch on their sleeve. From what I can tell, it seems to be a case of if you have conducted or worked closely with the Gurkhas, especially the 48th Gurkha Brigade, on field exercises, or if you are patrolling the border together or something similar to that, you could get the chance to wear this patch again. A lot of the information on this and a lot of other things, sadly, aren't available online, at least not in English. And so because of that, I'm kind of left in the dark, but I'm trying my best. Going on to the web equipment, this is the pattern 1944 web equipment. It's a very classical but very not common, but it shares a lot of common features with the previous 1937 pattern and the later 1958 pattern. So starting off with the ammunition pouches, as they would later on be called, they are they're not labeled left and right, but they are different, the left and the right one. The only difference really being that the left one contains a bayonet fob for the storage of the SLR bayonet. So a very simple closure on the front of it, almost identical, I'd say, to the pattern 58 version, or the pattern 58 ammunition pouches, made of a thin, typical light green or sometimes a darker jungle green canvas. The white ammunition pouch, unlike what we'll see later on with the 58 webbing, doesn't have that small little pocket on the side. Going into the belt, it has the very simple classical belt loop. It's been used since the 1937 pattern of webbing, but saw use not only here but also later on with the 1958 pattern of webbing. One thing of note about the belt, however, it is not a singular piece of canvas like you see with older pieces of webbing. It's in fact broken up into three pieces of webbing, that being a piece at the rear, going approximately from the middle of the left side to the middle of the right side, with the other two pieces making up the left and right side of the front. The reason this was done was so that, unlike with, let's say, the 1908 pattern of webbing, you didn't have to completely undo it and redo the fitting when you take it on and off. So this was made in an attempt to make it easier for the soldiers to set the size, and that way they could just throw it on, do the buckle, and be good to go. Worked very effectively in my opinion. Another thing about this webbing of note is the fact that it is not connected by only two places like you see with certainly the older release webbing equipment, and it's not even connected to the belt on four locations like you see with, say, 1908, 1937, 1958, or even PLCE. It is in fact connected by it is in fact connected to the belt by six places. Those places being two at the front, on top of the ammunition pouches, two on the sides, to the just behind the ammunition pouches, and two to the rear, which we will go into later. This was done in an attempt to make it more customizable to whatever body shape the soldier might have. Another thing of note is on the right side, just behind the ammunition pouch, is a small little strap made to hold the small of the rifle stock. The thought process behind having that strap there was, rather than a soldier having to carry the rifle entirely on the sling with the right shoulder, it can instead be carried, majority of the weight that is, on the belt, which is then evenly distributed thanks to the bracers. That way, the sling would only be used to stabilize the rifle rather than carry the entire weight of the rifle. That wasn't actually used all that much, not just in Hong Kong, but wherever 1944 patent went. That really wasn't used all that much, and so most times you'll see it rolled up and tucked away, like you saw in the picture I just showed. Going to the water bottle. The water bottle is made of a similar canvas to the ammunition pouches, being a thinner canvas, at least compared to the 1958 pattern of webbing. Um, the water bottle itself had two versions. Both versions were identical in all but the bottle cap. Both versions both versions consisted of the exact same shape and sized kidney-shaped aluminium bottle with a similar shaped aluminium mug for the soldiers to make their morning brew in. The only difference, as I said before, was the bottle cap. The first bottle cap was made out of aluminium, and alongside complicating the manufacturing process and making it a bit more expensive to produce, the main reason it was done away with was because the opening and closing of the water bottle with the aluminium cap made a squeaking type sound almost, and so that wasn't that reliable, or wasn't that good rather, for stealth situations. And so because of that, they switched to a rubberized black bottle cap, in fact an entirely rubber bottle cap, which you do see on my example here, and that is for the most part what you see being used in Hong Kong. Going down to the rear of the webbing, something that's actually missing on this particular example, but I do have right here, is the optional bayonet frog. The bayonet frog consists of a 2-inch loop at the top for you to slide it over the webbing belt, a loop up here to secure the top of the bayonet, or the top of the bayonet handle rather, sorry, and two tight loops down here, with the upper one having a slit in it to put the button of the bayonet sheath in. Now, the bayonet frog was intended to be used with the long sword type bayonets that you saw in the Second World War, and also indeed in the First World War, although by that point the 1907 bayonet had mostly been phased out. However, the webbing didn't actually come out in time to see the Second World War, or see service in the Second World War rather, with the first pictures of it coming out really in late 1945 after the conclusion of the war in Europe. However, the bayonet frog would see different applications on the parade square, in that soldiers, much like you see the Queen's Guard do today, would parade with only the webbing belt and the bayonet frog. Going down to the haversack, as it's officially called. Um, Again, it's a very simple haversack design, but it is a very functional haversack design. It consists of a large main pocket in the middle with two smaller pockets to either side, the small pockets being fastened with the similar tab systems that you see with the ammunition pouches. Um, this particular example is from 1945, as I said, late 1945, and so I won't actually be opening it because I don't want to risk damaging the example. The main flap here that closes the entire thing closes with two straps here. Again, it's a very simple but effective design. The two closing straps here with the main flap has been used since the 1908 webbing, certainly, and was used all the way up until 1958 webbing started being phased out for PLCE. Another thing you see here is two loops here to hold the general service shovel or the general service pickaxe, or any other type of implement a soldier might require. This is actually a big step forward for the British Army and for the webbing equipment, because until this point, the only way for a soldier to carry those sorts of items on them was by slotting it in rather uncomfortably, either vertically in between the large pack and the soldier's back, or horizontally where the braces meet the belt, or I've even seen it being slotted in at a 45-degree angle at the front, where the front brace connects to the ammunition pouch. So having a set place for the soldier to keep these not only kept the shovel head or the head of the implement away from the soldier's head, making it a lot easier for the soldier to lay down and fire in combat situations, but also allowed for more versatility and for soldiers to be more self-reliant. Continuing on with that self-reliance, there are two straps to the bottom here. Those straps there are put in place to hold the soldier's ground sheet or bedroll or poncho roll or something to that effect. Again, before this, although soldiers were given ground sheets and things of that nature in the Second World War, the only way to store it really on the 1937 pattern of webbing would be to just have it sort of hanging half in, half out of the large pack underneath the straps. So having a set place to put it shows the advancements in warfare, moving away from the whole entire battalions and regiments marching with wagon masters and quartermasters following behind them, and more to the current state of affairs where a group of soldiers goes out into the field and they have everything they need to last them, say, 72 hours out in the field. Now, this haversack had a second version that came out. Because the second version is larger, they are somewhat incorrectly referred to as the small pack and the large pack, but the official names, as far as I'm aware, is just the haversack and the second version haversack, or also first pattern, second pattern. Now, the second pattern, aside from being larger, keeps a lot of the same core principles, with a large main pocket in the center and two smaller pockets on the side. However, with the side pockets, they have swapped out the tab system for a simpler for the soldier but harder to manufacture, what I would call a key type system, where there's a rotating piece of metal where if it's in the vertical position, the pocket can easily be closed and opened, and when it's in the horizontal position, it is locked shut. You see the exact same system being used later on for that small pocket I mentioned previously on the 1958 pattern of webbing. On top of that, you do see a continuation of this self-reliance that the soldier would have, with the addition of more straps and even some metal buckles on the top of the 1944 pattern, on the top of the large pack or second version haversack, rather. Sorry. Again, it shows the changing warfare and that having these straps underneath worked so well that they added more of them. These ones are actually, to a degree, adjustable with how wide they can be, and these metal clips here also help soldiers affix other accoutrements onto the top of their haversack should they so require. Both haversacks actually have waterproofing within them. It's a very basic form of waterproofing, but a very effective form of waterproofing. On the main bag itself, the rubberized layer is only on the back and at the bottom of the bag, with the front being left completely bare canvas. The reasoning behind it is the top flap here, as you can see, has that rubberized layer in place. So that way, when it is closed and folded over, that top flap would waterproof the front and the top. The sides went unwaterproofed for the most part because the thought process was whatever's in the side pouches would likely help with waterproofing. Um, didn't help if a soldier was going through a river, for example, but with this opening system, you weren't going to make it fully waterproof to begin with. And that brings us on to an interesting question, and that is, why did Hong Kong continue using the 1944 pattern of webbing up until the 1980s, or certainly up until 1996? The reason has a lot to do with ventilation and keeping cool, especially here in the Orient. I'm sure you can probably already tell that I'm starting to sweat a bit. Yep, starting to get a bit of sweat even on my shirt, so that's how hot it is here. Um, because, as I mentioned, it has a thinner canvas, or it's made up of a thinner canvas, certainly compared to the 1958 pattern of webbing, it was preferred because it was cooler. Additionally, because of the adjustability of the 6 connecting points to the belt, a soldier could actually set the webbing up in such a way where the ammunition pouches lean out a bit from their chest, again allowing for ventilation and a cooling effect to occur. Now, when PLCE did eventually arrive, although quite late for Hong Kong, sadly. Although it was the preferred webbing to go with because it was cool, it was comfortable, it was breathable, all these things we were looking for. Because they arrived in such low numbers due to the timeline of them being issued and Hong Kong's handover, most soldiers in the end stuck with, if they had the choice that is, the pattern 44 webbing. That's not to say we didn't use 1958 pattern of webbing. We certainly did use it, and we used it quite a lot. It's just a case of, if a soldier had a choice, chances are they would have gone with the 1944 pattern rather than the later 1958 pattern. That brings us now onto the boots and the footwear soldiers would use. Traditionally, a soldier would be issued a boot like this. There's a high-topped direct molded sole or DMS boot. Complete leather construction, a hardened leather toe cap that the soldier would polish for parade, and a directly molded rubberized sole, hence the name. Now these boots are perfectly fine, perfectly serviceable both on the parade ground or conducting field exercises. It's for the most part waterproof. Overall, it is a very, very good boot. It only had one issue in Hong Kong, however, and that is that due to its being made of leather, it is not at all breathable, there's no ventilation, and thus it works like an oven, especially in Hong Kong. So because of that, for field exercises, when soldiers would go out marching in the bush, a lot of soldiers would opt for a private purchase pair of these. This is a Hong Kong version of a jungle boot with black canvas instead of the more common green canvas. Um, it still retains the directly molded rubberized sole, leather heel, leather toe area, and hardened toe cap for polishing, although most times these weren't used on parade. The only difference being the top part of it is made of a black canvas rather than leather. Now, obviously, because of this, you do lose the waterproofing tendencies, but it seems for a lot of the time the soldiers would opt for keeping cool and keeping ventilation and things like that and keeping comfortable rather than having it be waterproof on the off chance that it rains or you do have to cross a river by going through the river. This particular example is actually a more modern example. You can tell because there are two vents here for ventilation. I'm not entirely sure whether or not these were used during the period. However, it is what is now sold. Going to the headwear and a bit more about the regiments or forces here in Hong Kong. As I mentioned, there were two forces. There were the part-time volunteer regiment, the Royal Hong Kong Regiment, and there's the full-time regular soldiers, the Hong Kong Military Service Corps. The Hong Kong Military Service Corps was disbanded, unfortunately, in 1996, with the Royal Hong Kong Regiment being disbanded a year previously in 1995. Both regiments used the same dark navy colored beret, with the only difference being the insignia. You'll see that trend continue later on. The Hong Kong Military Service Corps beret, or at least the insignia for the regular soldiers, consisted of a red rectangle on roughly a 2-to-1 ratio with a golden embroidered dragon. That dragon symbol has actually been used in Hong Kong since the Second World War with the Hong Kong Chinese Regiment, but you see it continued use up until 1996 with their disbandment. Something to note, the officers, instead of going for a golden cap badge or golden embroidered cap badge, went instead with a more traditional silver colored metallic cap badge, which would be put in place there instead of any patch or any insignia. They would just have this and nothing else. Going on to the Royal Hong Kong Regiment, again see the same dark navy colored beret, but with a different patch and insignia. This patch is a green diamond. You do see occasionally red diamonds being used by the junior corps, which is basically the cadets, which is why the cadets in Hong Kong still do use a red diamond to this day. However, you see the Royal Hong Kong Regiment instead opting for a silver metallic cap badge for the lower ranking soldiers, with instead the gold color being used for the officers. Now, there's not really any reason I can find online as to why the two color schemes contradict one another, especially considering the two regiments worked alongside one another quite frequently. Even speaking to some of my Cantonese sources and friends, they have no idea either. So it seems to be one of those things which is unfortunately lost to time. A small note about the Royal Hong Kong Regimental Beret. At some point, they did have an embroidered beret following along the lines of the Hong Kong Military Service Corps. That being a green felt diamond, as you still see here, but with the cap badge instead being embroidered onto it rather than having the metallic cap badge. There isn't much or any information out there about when this came into effect, when it was used, or any of that sort of information, as you do still see the classic metal cap badge being used even in the field right up until the disbandment of the Royal Hong Kong Regiment in 1995. So again, I don't have an example of that sadly, but it's one of those cases of, due to Hong Kong's situation, there's not really any resources about this physically out there, and all the resources online are in Cantonese. Going to the parade, the general parade peak cap was something like this, although the berets were used on parade quite often as well. The peak cap consists of a black leather visor, a black leather chin strap. The visor had a green underside to it, and it is otherwise an entirely black colored peak cap, aside from the red piping going around the outer rim. Now, when the Royal Hong Kong Regiment used these, you do see the lower ranking soldiers use their silver cap badges, whilst the high ranking officers use a golden cap badge, just like with the berets. However, with the Hong Kong Military Service Corps, you only see the silver cap badge being used here. So whether that means only officers would wear these, or whether that means everyone who was on parade using these was given temporarily a silver cap badge, I'm not entirely sure. Again, a lot of this information unfortunately is either not available online or it is in Cantonese only. Obviously, when in the field, soldiers wouldn't be using the peak cap. They would be using one of three examples. They'd be using their trusty berets. They'd be using their DPM bush cap, as you see here. If you know anything about the older style of bush caps, the 68 or the 85 sort of era of bush caps, you know what this one is. It's a simple bush cap design, two vents on either side for ventilation, a strap going around the bottom of the main head portion for soldiers to stick foliage in, and these little tabs for a soldier to attach a little piece of rope for them to fasten on the back of their heads. This particular example doesn't have the plastic toggle that it would most times be used with, simply because I haven't gotten around to acquiring one of those yet. However, aside from the aforementioned beret and the bush hat, you would see on a very, very rare occasion the good old Mark 6 helmet. Now, a note before I go into the helmets, although Hong Kong was issued these helmets, they were also issued previously the Mark 4 helmets. They weren't used very much because of our socio-political situation at the time. We didn't really have any impending threats. China wasn't going to invade us because they were on the edge of getting us without a bullet being fired anyway. There weren't any armed enemies. The biggest thing that the Hong Kong Military Service Corps and Royal Hong Kong Regiment had to deal with was illegal immigrants, which aren't armed in this case. So although these helmets were used for training purposes, they never saw real combat until the Hong Kong Military Service Corps was deployed into the Gulf for a brief period of time. But in Hong Kong, at least, these weren't really used or seen much. So as a result of that, you don't see many pictures or videos of this in use, or any, really. Talking a bit about the Mark 6 anyway, it's a classic olive green ballistic nylon helmet. Got a very simple liner and chin strap solution being made of leather padding, a hardened foam as padding, and canvas straps for the main harness in the top and for the chin strap. Chin strap having a leather section there to wrap around the soldier's chin, which would then be secured with a button. Now, there are also DPM covers for the Mark 6 helmets, this one being a S95 DPM example. The reason why I only have an S95 example of this is, again, because they weren't used much in Hong Kong. Finding a older style of DPM helmet cover just in general, even in Europe and in the UK, is quite difficult. In Hong Kong, however, it is impossible, basically. They are so rare and so rarely used that to find one, you have to basically win the lottery. Going now into what is, for me, one of the most exciting features of historical impressions and historical uniforms, the armaments used. I have here a airsoft replica of the main armament used by Royal Forces in Hong Kong, that of course being the classic 7.62mm L1A1 self-loading rifle, or SLR for short. This particular example is a wood furniture example. Now, when you look at pictures of Hong Kong troops using these, especially from the 1980s onwards, most times they're using the black plastic furniture rather than the wooden furniture. That being said, you do still see the wood furniture showing up from time to time, and on rare occasions you also see a mixture of furniture where they might have some parts being wooden and other parts being plastic. I'm not really sure why this was done or to what scale this was done. It seems to have been quite rare, much like how it was quite rare in Europe and in England and elsewhere in the Commonwealth. However, you do see it here in Hong Kong, just on a much, much lesser scale. All SLRs come with, or were used with, this olive green or olive drab canvas sling. Very simple sling design, seen since the old 303 SMLE in the Second World War. Only difference being a change of color and a change of the metal material being used here. When these were first issued, they actually had a bit of a green protective layer on the metal fittings as well. This one, I'm not sure if you can see it, does still have some remnants of that green layer on it. However, it does quickly with wear fall off or get scratched away. Sadly, I don't have any other physical examples to show you or physical reproductions to show you in terms of the armaments, so I hope on-screen pictures will suffice. Continuing on with the long arms, you do see on occasion the M16A2 being used. You do also see the CAR-15, also known as the XM177 carbine, being used. To what effect or scale these were used is, again, sort of left out in historical accounts and historical books, sadly, but you do see pictures here and there of them being used both on training in the firing range, in the field, and even on parade on occasion. Going more into like the smaller armaments, you do see on occasion as well Hong Kong forces, both with the two local forces and even with Gurkhas when they were deployed here, using the Sterling SMG. Similar case with these in that we don't really know, sadly, to what scale these were used, but you do see plenty of pictures here and there of them being used and them being laid out on parade. There's also a photograph of 3 female soldiers of the Royal Hong Kong Regiment using them on a field training exercise alongside the 48th Gurkha Brigade. Officers were issued a sidearm, that sidearm being typically the Browning High Power. It's a very good, very reliable classical pistol being made by the Americans, I believe, in 1935. However, the British adopted it, I believe, in the late 1930s and only started officially phasing it out in the 2010s region. However, you do still see some British soldiers sticking to that sidearm to this very day, simply because it's a classical sidearm. If it isn't broken, don't fix it, even though there are some design flaws with it. So overall, that brings us to the end of my little overview of the kit used by Royal Forces in Hong Kong. If you enjoyed this video or found it at all fascinating or interesting, please do let me know in the comments down below. If you'd like to see any other uniform being used, such as the jungle green Airtex uniform that was used previously, or even going back until the World War II uniform that was used by the Hong Kong Volunteer Defense Corps, do let me know as well in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching, and God save the Queen.